I introduce today's speaker and topic, just a quick note about our new monthly workshops called Focus Sessions. These are free online themed meetings where we explore current leadership and organizational topics with experienced practitioners and researchers. They are primarily designed for our MBA students, but we've opened them up to alumni and the wider public as well. And so our first focus session is called the Cybersecurity Playbook, which looks at how leaders can strengthen cybersecurity governance without needing technical expertise. It's a practical session on managing risk, on understanding responsibilities, and making informed decisions in a digital and AI-driven environment. So anyone is welcome to join. You simply register for the sessions you'd like to attend, and you can find all upcoming focus sessions on our website under the tab Events. But we'll paste the link in the chat in a little while. Back to today's topic, which is defining healthy organization culture, diagnosis to action. This topic is all about responsible leadership. Responsible leadership, in turn, is about striving to become a better person, behaving responsibly towards your colleagues, and making your companies and organizations thrive by thrive by developing sustainable business opportunities to solve the challenges of today's world. For this discussion, we're joined by Dr. George Woods for his presentation, followed by the reflection of Pierre-Yves Robert. And so a little bit about George and Pierre. Dr. George Woods is the CEO of the Culture Architects, a systems thinking C-suite executive and organizational transformation strategist with over 30 years of cross-sector leadership across financial services, healthcare, social enterprise, and humanitarian organizations. He's led major strategic, cultural, and operational change initiatives for global institutions, including HSBC, Deutsche Bank, Ernst & Young, Nedbank, and St. John's Ambulance. Dr. Woods' work focuses on building high-performing cultures, enabling organizational resilience, and driving sustainable growth. And so Dr. George also lectures in leadership and strategy and serves as an academic tutor at Business School Netherlands, and he actively contributes to social impact through board service and leadership mentoring across the UK and Africa. As mentioned, our reflector is Pierre-Yves Robert, who is the co-founder and managing partner of the Culture Architects. Pierre is an accomplished C-suite leader, non-executive director and business coach with extensive experience across South Africa and the UK. He specializes in organizational culture, strategic alignment, transformation and sustainable growth for startups, scale-ups, and established enterprises. Pierre-Yves has served on multiple boards, including as chair, strengthening governance and decision-making frameworks. And he is also a tutor with Business School Netherlands, supporting leadership and strategic management development. Pierre is passionate about people and culture, and he helps organizations build collaborative teams and drive meaningful, lasting change. Dr. George, over to you.
Thank you, Jean, and a huge privilege as always to be with the Business School and to share a really, really important topic. So I'm just going to make sure I can screen share at this point. There you go. Jean, can I confirm you can see the presentation?
We can.
Okay, fantastic. And it's in presentation mode.
That's right.
Very good. Okay, a really important topic, diagnosis to remediation. And organizational culture is really fundamental to success. Jean, Pierre, we had a session with students this last weekend, a class from Nigeria, and we likened it to a ship. So the steering of a ship through uncharted and troubled waters, and I think that's where organizations find themselves. And if you think about a ship as being the ship itself, the operational functions within the ship, and of course people within the ship, the maintenance of the ship, the looking after the ship, and of course strategy being the main steer. Where does the ship go next? But if what's going on inside that ship is unhealthy, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if the culture's not supportive, you've got problems. And so that's what we're exploring. And we're very proud to announce that we are partnering with Business School Netherlands in creating great leaders, but also helping and enabling good culture. Now, Drucker is often credited with saying that culture eats strategy for breakfast, but it is more widely suggested, and in fact, it was Steve Jobs or Jack Welch who said this. But the thought holds true, the premise holds true, that if you could have the healthiest or the greatest strategy and plans in the world, but if your culture is unhealthy, your strategy will fail, and that's just a given. So what are we working on here? We work on diagnosis to remediation. So what's going wrong with organizational culture? Why is it unhealthy? And so while culture is often viewed as an emergent property, this methodology treats it as intentional design. What are we saying here? Understand how the culture is perceived, what's going wrong, and how do you remediate? And so we've developed a method around coaching psychology and design thinking. Pierre, you've got your hand up.
George, I don't know if you're changing the slides on your end, but we're not seeing anything.
I am. So
no, we're not seeing that.
Okay.
So I think you do need to still go into presentation mode. Bottom right-hand corner.
Thank you very much, Pierre. Thanks for letting me know. Okay, just going to stop sharing for a moment. It often happens if you've got a two-screen approach, particularly on Zoom. Can you see this? Has that changed?
Perfect.
Fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much. And so in a post-pandemic world, the models of organizational development, the models of organizational resilience have all had to evolve. And what does sustainability look like now? And so the piece of work we've done is looking at digital transformation and organizations that thrive in a post-pandemic world. We've looked at organizations that operate in what we now would term hybrid working, and obviously that impacts a number of us. And in culture, what does this mean in the context of hybrid isolation? So distributed work challenges and relationship building. And what it means for organizations now is that you have to intentionally build healthy culture around hybrid organizations. And so really what we focus on is remediation of existing culture, and then what we term inclusion imperatives. So looking at diverse workforces, we look at macrocultures and microcultures that embrace difference, not just tolerate it. And I think it's safe to say that culture is no longer a soft side effect. It is a strategic determinant of sustainable competitive advantage. And so really, really important. You cannot manage what you do not systematically diagnose, or indeed, as any good MBA student will know, whatever gets measured gets managed. And so understanding the health of your organizational culture is really, really important. And so there's the sort of visible effects and artifacts of culture, behaviors, rituals, office layout, and of course, now working in a hybrid world, what does that look like? But below the surface is the espoused values, the strategies, the goals, the philosophies. And then there's the shared basic assumptions, so unconscious beliefs, perceptions through feelings. And so we believe, and I think you would agree, that you really have to understand and get under the skin of organizational culture to understand what is happening. And you could see this in the context of what are your personal values and what are the organizational's values. And we talk about a concept called entropy, which is effectively your levels of chaos and creative tension within an organization. You need a little bit of chaos, you need a little bit of creative tension. But if that entropy level is particularly high, it means that there isn't cohesion, okay? And so, and to understand that cohesion, you need to do some diagnostics. So what we work on is is one, understanding the existing culture, then ideating what is a desired culture. In other words, a future view of the organization. So as you future-proof for strategy purposes, what is an ideal culture for your organization? So we center on what we call the designed experience. And so we do some systemic modeling, we do some testing and iterating. And one of the things we will be offering MBA students is a toolkit on doing the diagnosis, interpreting the diagnosis, ideating what is an ideal culture and how do you work towards that. And alongside that is coaching psychology. So that's self-awareness and relational dynamics. Really important. Leaders need to understand the role they play in creating culture within an organization. You might inherit what we would term micro and macro cultures, but you as the leader have a role to play in transforming the culture of your organization. Go back to that image of the ship. Where is the ship steering towards? What strategy have you got? Operationally, how does that ship hang together? How are the people feeling inside of that ship? Okay, and you as a leader have a really important role to play in that. As a result of a DBA that I did and then collaborated with other researchers, we designed what we call the modus quantum model, which is a system for organizational health. And really important for all organizations is the purpose, the mission. What's at the center of the organization? What holds that organization together? What narrative do you tell about the organization? And then all of the other matters are held in balance. Your governance, your creating a collaborative culture. The brand is really, really important here. So how do your customers perceive your brand? How do your staff perceive your brand? Is there coherence? Is it a good experience? Okay. Or indeed your governance structures. We talk about shared economy. What that really means is building a more collaborative environment, sharing across silos, shared infrastructure for mutual beneficiation of the organization, or indeed driving sustainability. So not only sustainability in a modern context, but also sustainability of good culture, sustainability of a good strategy that keeps iterating and keeps growing powerfully. Leadership and development, building sound leadership and development, empowering people and truly investing in people. All of this contributes to healthy culture. And so this is a model that we've developed, and we have designed our diagnosis and indeed our remediation based on this model. And the diagnosis tool is based on this as well. Really important that leaders understand their role. You cannot transform a system without transforming the self. And if you think about what we've done in the 102 coming into the 103rd Goodmorning BSNs, it has been almost singularly focused on good culture, on the role of leadership, on the role of governance, but leaders being transformative, being transforming. So transforming within themselves, but also transforming the organizations in which they work. But what this relies on is that leaders are deeply self-reflective. Okay, so there's a bit of shadow work required here. You may recall we did an exercise on the shadow self, the shadow leader. And so we built a foundation of leadership effectiveness. We use tools like Enneagram and IEQ9, that idea of understanding personal values, organizational values, and creating healthy entropy. Remember, we spoke about entropy as your levels of chaos within an organization. And then leaders must map their own patterns to see how they unconsciously shape organizational dynamics. Okay, the old expression of the fish rots from the head. Well, that is true. Okay, it's absolutely true. And so we, as responsible leaders here, as MBA students and alumni BSN, or indeed interested parties, need to keep reflecting on the role we play in leading good and healthy organizational culture. I often get the question saying, well, I work within an organization where the macro culture isn't necessarily healthy. Well, I'd say to you, well, then you drive the micro culture. You drive a healthy culture within your team, and that can grow. Okay, and that's really what that model tries to illustrate. It sort of radiates outwards. We've developed a roadmap for cultural transformation, which starts with leadership awareness. And so recognizing current realities without judgment. Okay. We see the world through our own filters and through our own experience. And we create a space where we say, well, let's reflect personally. What does it mean for us? What does it mean for the organization? What does it mean for the people I lead? And attunement. What might be creating, what could a future world look like? What could a future culture look like? What is the ideal culture we're working towards? And so what that really relies on is personal reflection and, again, macro reflection. And then you've done your diagnosis, you've understood what's going wrong within your own culture. You look at what we term the limiting behaviors. So what limiting behaviors are there that are not enabling good culture? Then you create some alignment and how you bridge the gaps and design interventions. And we spoke about ideating an ideal culture, and we've developed some tools around that. And then once you have set that, you work from a really good sound foundation. You begin to accelerate and scale. And of course, building good and future-proof businesses, culture is arguably one of the most important factors. Just an idea of the sort of diagnosis we would go through. We move from gut feel, proper triangulation into a quantitative world, which says, what did we sense? What are we seeing? How does that triangulate? And of course, we've already spoken around leaders and their individual focus. So mapping leadership personality clusters, understanding how those impact on an organization, and then focusing on the qualitative data as well. We simply are giving you a taster of the sorts of things we're going to be offering through BSN. We have designed what we call a culture canvas. And of course, it's adapted from Osterwalder's business model canvas, which really looks at core values, behaviors and rituals, decisions and norms, symbols and artifacts, and through a facilitated process of ideating a future culture. This is one of the tools we would use. And I suppose really, really important here is understanding how we influence the DNA of the organization, the culture DNA. How do you build lasting cultures? Well, you build them because you've understood what's gone wrong, you've done ideation, you've built some bridges, and you iterate from a strong foundation, and you keep building good and solid culture. Just some gap analysis work we would do. We would look at innovation. We would look at safety. We'd look at collaboration, accountability, agility. What is the current reality versus the desired state? And bearing in mind, the desired state is a future, a healthy culture. Okay, but understanding root cause problems, understanding the limiting behaviors, understanding the role of leadership and how you develop leadership along the way. So the understanding is not just the what needs to change, but the why. And bearing in mind, right at the center of that model, we had the purpose and the mission of the organization. When that is clear, that's the true north. Okay, that's what we work towards. We co-create. Okay, so we do culture hackathons, and we do some behavioral nudges. We do some Enneagram work. These are simply tools we will show you on how you would go about ideating an ideal culture. And I'm mindful of time, so we really are just sort of galloping through this, but it gives you a taster of what's available. It is participatory and it is co-creative. It's not a top-down mandate. Culture is something that, yes, you would expect your executive and senior management to drive, and you'd accept your board of trustees to be deeply invested, but it is something that emerges from the ground up. It is the true voice of the people who work in your organization. We have some measuring and refining, so understanding the current reality versus the desired state. What are the limiting factors that are impacting? Okay, and you would have your lag indicators. You'd understand exactly what it is you are working towards, and there'd be a feedback loop, regular retrospectives to examine what is working. Culture, I think, really important to say, is not a set and forget project. Okay, you set it, you iterate, you test, you continue to diagnose. Whatever gets measured gets managed, but you always have a true north. What is the true north you are working towards? We, out of interest, and this is completely, this is not part of the curricula, but we would offer immersion experiences. And this is one example of an immersion experience that we could offer in KwaZulu-Natal in South Africa. We could offer it in the United Kingdom. Indeed, we could offer it in Lagos, Abuja. We could offer it wherever the immersion experience is required. And then I think just to note that we leverage technology, because that's the age we're in. We leverage some pretty developed technology in terms of diagnosis, iterative planning, and measuring and managing. But building organizations worthy of human commitment and community, and healthy cultures thrive, financial returns and innovation and retention are all outcomes of healthy organizations. But we also drive home that it is the responsibility of all leaders to cultivate environments where people flourish. And what we'd like to do alongside BSN is help organizations get to that place. And we've been able to do it fairly successfully on a number of larger organizations and indeed small, medium enterprises. Now, culture is not something you have, it is something you do. The question is not whether you attend to culture, but how to do so with rigor and with humanity. And so this is just a deep dive, or rather, it's a taster of how you would deep dive. Diagnosis is really important. Measurement is really important. Keeping a true north is vital, and continual iterating of organizational culture. So I'm going to pause there and hand over to our reflector for the day, Pierre-Yves Robert.
Thank you, George. That was indeed a whirlwind tour. I'm sure we could take any number of those slides and expand it in further sessions, so we'll have that conversation with the team. Lots to reflect on. Starting from my last note, I think is probably a good place to start, where you say that culture is something that you do. I suppose what often happens in many organizations is people have the tick box exercise of let's have them, talk about a mission, we'll define some values, and it doesn't go much further than that, right? And so this organizational culture just evolves, it grows arms and legs, and then we wonder why people don't feel empowered, energized, engaged, and the work just becomes really difficult and tough for everyone. So I think it's important to, my reflection is that culture needs to be very intentional. It has to be designed. It doesn't just miraculously appear out of nowhere. And so that takes time. And it's interesting that we're having this session today coming off the back of our last couple of tutoring sessions with various MBA groups, where we've been talking about strategy and operations, and yet so much of the content and so much of the group discussion ends up being focused around organizational culture, which I find quite fascinating. And one of the things that we spoke about in those last sessions is that it takes time. If you're going through a culture transformation process, it requires time and commitment. It does not happen on the turn of a ticky. And as leaders, I think there's always this expectation that we can just talk about it, have a company kickoff, and then it's a tick box and it's done. And that's never really the case. So I guess that takes me into some of the other things that you shared around the critical importance of leadership in driving culture. And part of that is what you spoke around self-knowledge and the shadow work that we have to do as leaders, because I think you made the point, it becomes a cap on effectiveness. So if you have a team of leaders in an organization who perhaps are bought into the wrong mental maps or world views, and they don't do the hard work of self-reflection and understanding, doing their shadow work, it's probably not going to result in a very effective cultural transformation exercise, right? And that's deeply uncomfortable for many leaders. We're not used to doing that. There is perhaps still an expectation or an attitude that, as from the perspective of leaders, we can just issue a decree and it will all happen. But you have to walk the talk, so to speak. So critically important there. Just running through some of the other notes that I made, because I'm sure there will be some questions and we want to leave some space for that. The whole post-pandemic fallout, it's 5 years later, 4 or 5 years later, depending on how you benchmark that or what the baseline is that you use. And to some extent, we're still dealing with the fallout of that, still dealing with the fallout of the change in how we work. And that has a huge impact on organizational culture. And now, as we're still navigating through that process, over the last 2 years in particular, you've then had the double whammy of Gen AI and the rise of agentic bots, automation, etc., and the fallout that is having. I can only imagine that in many, many organizations, that's creating a huge amount of tension and chaos. And then on the other hand, I've also recently read quite a bit of research coming out of McKinsey that is showing that many organizations, whilst they've embraced AI, are not seeing the benefits, the productivity gains that they would have expected. And I think that's largely down to, again, not having those deeply honest, open, frank conversations. And that speaks to organizational culture as well. So we're concerned, people are concerned that they're going to lose their jobs. But to your point at the end around the ethical imperative, how do we nurture and navigate that process so that we don't end up with huge societal fallout and actually enrich the work experience and make our organization stronger, better, and more resilient and take advantage of the technology? And that, I think, is largely a question of organizational culture. What else? Well, I guess the good way to close this out, really, and leave some space for questions and comments is around your opening quote, and we can debate who said it. But yeah, plenty of orgs out there have amazing products, amazing services. They have scale, but yet don't realize all the gains that they could. Because whilst you might have all of those wonderful things, the organizational culture is not well defined, not designed, not intentionally designed. So we soldier on, we plod on, the mere momentum of large organizations means that they survive, but they don't necessarily thrive. And that ultimately is what we're trying to address. I mean, that's our aspiration, right? So I'll park it there.
Thanks, Pierre. Jean, I guess over to you. Pierre, thank you for just summarising where we've got to, and I think it aligns quite nicely with some of the questions coming through. So, Jean, maybe over to you.
Thank you. Thanks, Pierre, and thank you, Dr. George. I'm going to ask Paul just to maybe say a few words on next week's topic, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Paul, over to you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. George. Thank you, Pierre, for that wonderful and insightful session. We have a lot of questions of people asking to want to get the slides and the presentations and the recordings. It shows how, insightful the session has been. Just want to announce for next week, we will be having a topic on ESG. Just a minute, I would just like to read out. So next week, that will be the 103rd edition. And our topic would be responsible leadership in uncertain times, ESG beyond the checkbox. And that will be by Alexander H. Camp, who is an ESG consultant. We'll be having him next week. So you want to book your calendar, mark your calendars for that. So we'll go straight away into the questions. For today, we have 3 questions from at least in the Q&A section. The first one is from Oluchi Okoye, our star prize winner for the 100th edition of the Good Morning BSN. Good to have you here, Oluchi. So Oluchi is saying, my question will be, how can top and medium management imbibe this in their organizational culture? I think she had initially mentioned to Dr. George that the presentation was good, and the phrase participatory and co-create, not the go-down mandate, needs to be imbibed by top, mid, and middle management. So she's now asking, how can top and middle management imbibe this in their organizational culture? Over to you, Dr. George.
Thank you very much, Oluchi. And you raised such an important question. So if you recall, so we had purpose and mission of an organization right at the center of our model. And then you radiate out from there, okay, and culture, leadership and development, etc. The development of leaders to be self-reflective leaders, to link to the purpose of the organization, and then themselves to create an organization, and this is what we would refer to as microcultures, where people thrive. So there's something about personal and deep investment. There is absolutely something about understanding at a diagnostic level what's going wrong with the organizational culture, some of the limiting behaviors, and demonstrating real intent to turn it around. Pierre, and I think I think you would agree that it can feel disingenuous if you say one thing, but your actions are, just don't align. So if you say that you're working for a purposeful organization, but actually it doesn't feel good to be there, the culture feels rotten, the micro and the macro cultures are misaligned, your customers don't have a good experience, that just feels disingenuous and inauthentic. So leaders play a really important part about being invested and then really understanding what's going wrong with their culture and being self-reflective and also driving change. And I think, Paul, safe to say that you'd really want to see that happening through all levels of the organization consistently. Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Dr. George. The next question is from David Olukayode. He says, can we conclude that culture in this context goes beyond good or bad to what is right and consistent with the mission and goal of the organization?
Absolutely. I think, Pierre, do you want to have a go at this one?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yes, I think the guiding point needs to be around the organization's mission, whatever that may be. Okay. So that, I think, that's what sets true north, and allied to that would be the values that you as an organization define. I don't think it's a case of saying, we've been speaking about bad cultures and good cultures, but it's more about having an organizational culture that enables the mission, whatever that may be. Having said that, and we don't want to get into a philosophical, go down a rabbit hole here, but there are still, certainly, I would say, good management and leadership behaviors that are common across all organizations that evidence a strong, thriving organizational culture. And that's largely in terms, I think, of how you engage with and work with the team or people that are in the business. So that, is essentially to the question, it is very much anchored around mission and vision and purpose.
All right, thank you, Pierre. Well, our time is really first spent. And we see you have loads of questions coming in. I'm not sure if you're able to answer all this. Let me just take one more. from an anonymous attendee. It says, how can organization know it has a culture problem before going into diagnostic mode?
Great question. And it starts with commercial results. It starts with staff retention. Starts is probably the wrong word. It is evidenced in commercial performance, evidenced in staff retention, evidenced in the water cooler conversations. What's happening behind the scenes. It is evidenced in the way the place feels. I mean, Pierre, you did an interesting piece of work the other day, and you shared with us the smell of the place, okay, which I think is quite a helpful video. In other words, how does it feel to be there? And when an organization doesn't feel purposeful, I mean, why are we here? It's not just for commercial results. There's got to be a linkage to purpose. So there's so many areas, Paul, that you could explore around how an organizational feels. But the model we've designed, the modus quantum model, actually talks to key elements that you can measure within an organization to know the health of that organization. Yeah.
All right, thank you. Okay, go ahead, Pierre.
Sorry, very quickly to add, because I know we're on the clock. But to George's observation there, unfortunately, I think there are many organizations that are still very strong financially, and leadership is completely blind to the fact that there is a culture problem, and they're not the ones gathering around the water coolers. But if I see perpetual headcount turnover and having to constantly recruit, that's not a good sign.
Indeed. Absolutely.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Pierre. Thank you, Dr. George. Over to you, Jean.
I'm smiling because this is such a thought-provoking and clearly very engaging kind of conversation and topic, but with our time having run out, thank you very much, Dr. George and Pierre, for again this morning's insightful session. And thanks also to everyone that joined us this morning. It was really engaging. If you want to know more about the BSN Impact Center for Great Leadership, or you're interested in a program to further grow the talent of your team and yourself, please put it in the chat and we will contact you. But also, please be on the lookout for information about the next session of Good Morning BSN. We certainly look forward to welcoming you there. And thanks again, everyone. Have a lovely day.